Get started with keynote number 1. Thank you again for taking the time to come out to Appleby this morning. I don't want to take up a lot of time because Myles is great, but I just wanted to say thank you to the Appleby employees that I see in the room. For TechFest folks, we opened up both keynotes to our own staff. I see some familiar faces in the crowd. Thank you for coming. I don't want to take up any more of Myles's time, so what I will tell you is that Myles, who's standing right off in the corner over there, is awesome. He's a data scientist. He's a principal at his company, PRAKTIKAI. He is an expert in this area, and we've been seeking his counsel and kind of his advice as we've been working on this here at Appleby. Myles and I used to work together at an organization that I was at before I came here, and he is excellent at teaching. Fun fact, Myles is technically a math teacher. That's turned his career into where it's gone today. So please help me welcome Myles to the stage, and I'm just going to toss this mic off.
Okay, thank you very much, Alana, for that very kind intro. I'm Myles Harrison. I am a data scientist and consultant, and I have my own company, PRAKTIKAI. And I just want to say thanks at the very, very beginning to both CIS and especially to Appleby to host us all here and to give me the opportunity to give this talk about the topic that I am very passionate about. So today, we're going to be talking about generative AI, transforming the future of technology and education, and I'm going to cover a lot of ground. I'll do my best to do that in this very short hour that we have, and hopefully leave some time for a little Q&A at the end as well. Okay? So let's get right into it. So very quickly, unfortunately, I will talk a little bit about myself and the company at the beginning, just to get us going, and so I'm not a stranger up here talking to you. And then I'll talk about where we currently are in this crazy world we are finding ourselves in with all the things that are rapidly happening with AI. I'll talk a little bit about the general landscape of AI and generative AI, and then finally we'll talk about the future of what we see to come in probably the next 5 or more years, and that will be a lot of my POV and PRAKTIKAI's POV on that before we wrap up. Okay, so just by way of introductions, beyond what I already did, hello again, I'm Myles Harrison, consultant, data scientist. I spent many years working in the big consulting world, starting in the agency world at places like Sapient that was acquired by Publicis. Also worked at places like PwC and Accenture in data science, analytics, machine learning, things like that. And as Alana said, I also have a connection to education and teaching in that I was the global head of data science at BrainStation, which is a tech boot camp for about 4.5 years. So I led our team globally there. We had educators in New York, Vancouver, London, and the UK, as well as Toronto. And I also helped to develop the curriculum there around machine learning for an accelerated 12-week program that took people from no technical background into being ready to have data science roles in just a few short months. I also teach on my own still and am a passionate community builder in the data and AI community in Toronto. So at the top there, that's me giving one of my free or pay what you can workshops on generative AI and natural language processing, which we did at the library by Young and Eglinton. So we had about, I think, 50 or 60 people come out to that. And there on the right, I'm giving a workshop on generative AI at another free conference that was here in Toronto. And then at the bottom, I also organize the Machine Learning Toronto community. So we have a community of about 4,000 data and AI practitioners in the GTA, and regularly hold events on those topics with industry speakers and networking. Okay, and then the company, PRAKTIKAI, fairly new venture for me, an expansion of my freelancing work, and I'm looking to build what I call a consulting practice that is both values-based, so we care a lot about the work we do and the people we work with, as well as value-based. The word PRAKTIKAI, it has AI in it, but it is actually the Greek word for practicality. So my goal is actually to do AI, data, machine learning, cut through the hype, and actually just do work to actually drive value in businesses and organizations. That's what this is about. Very new venture for me. I just started the company last year, and we've really just been getting going since January. Okay, so now that that's out of the way, let's talk a little bit about where we are and kind of level set, and then we can talk about what's out there and then lead into what we will see in the future. Okay, so how many people familiar with this figure? Okay, so for those that don't know, this is the hype cycle, courtesy of Gartner. And for every new technology that goes through a hype cycle, it follows these four main phases. We have the innovation trigger, which is what kicks off the hype cycle. In the case of generative AI, this was the November moment in November of 2022 when ChatGPT was released, too much fanfare. And then you rise into the peak of inflated expectations, where there is tons and tons of hype and lots of overpromising and lots of possibly too strong optimism about what this thing can do. And then as reality starts to set in, you sink into the trough of disillusionment until finally you gradually climb the slope of enlightenment into the plateau of productivity, where you actually realize value from this new technology, right? So many, many different hype cycles we have been through already. And when we think about generative AI, think about other hype cycles we've already gone through. I'm looking at you, blockchain. I'm looking at you, Internet of Things, Web3, NFT, very, very short, very, very peaky hype cycle. And according to Gartner, as of August of 2023, I believe, we were at the absolute peak of inflated expectations for generative AI. And now we have actually, as of November of 2024, started to descend into the trough of disillusionment for generative AI. But I do want to point out that we are still very much in the peak of the hype cycle for this new thing that is part of generative AI called agentic AI, which I will talk about a bit in this presentation. So kind of the question and the thesis that both of this presentation and also what I think about a lot is how long is it going to be until we actually navigate the trough of disillusionment and actually start to see generative AI integrated into the daily lives and the work of ourselves and the work we do to actually realize productivity. So just level setting about Gen AI. This is a lot of research from these types of consulting firms, so I'll bite my tongue, but take it with a grain of salt. But as most people know, we've seen an explosive growth in the adoption of generative AI, seeing organizations, only about a third of organizations using it, moving up to now like 3/4, and who knows, that number is probably closer to like 90% now. But still a lot of hype, a lot of inflated expectations. Most executives are ranking Gen AI and AI as a top priority and something very important, but they're still at the same time kind of counterintuitively, they are still disillusioned with it and feeling that they're not seeing the results and the value out of it that they could. And so there's a lot of uncertainty. People are doing these projects, they're doing these POCs, but they're not sort of really making it anywhere, and it's not really clear where the business value is. And this is something I think about and talk about a lot, which does not always make for the sexiest sales pitch. So finally, the thing I do care about the most is the one at the bottom, which is the practical application. McKinsey has said that there is the opportunity, like these consulting firms always make claims like this, that there's the opportunity to add trillions to the global economy, but at the current time, we're only seeing it being adopted in a few kind of main business functions across organizations, okay? So there's a lot of opportunity, but if we actually see those trillions of dollars added with the estimate that McKinsey has, I will personally eat my hat. Okay, so let's take a step back and talk about what AI actually is. Not selling snake oil here, not in contributing to the already inflated hype. Basically, as far as I'm concerned, this is what makes up artificial intelligence. You have data, a very, very large amount of data now. We're talking about double-digit percentages of the web in the form of unstructured text. And at the end of the day, people don't like to talk about this because it doesn't sound as complicated, but the basis of all machine learning and AI is just statistics, right? People really don't like it when I point out that the mathematics that underpins the large language models and generative AI models that we see today, i.e. Deep learning, the mathematics for that is statistics modeling that has existed since the mid-60s, right? We're only starting to see it realized and the value of it because now we have the stuff on the right, lots and lots of compute, very powerful infrastructure, and the code to use these algorithms in the middle to make product and to realize value out of these models and these techniques, all right? So out of all those things come together into the middle to bring you models. And there's now a lot of talk about models with Gen AI. Models are becoming sort of commoditized. They're becoming basically product, or in some cases, they are becoming the core offering of entire organizations, entire companies. And so you'll hear people talking about like models as a service, and you'll hear people talking, as I will talk in this presentation, about foundation model providers. And this is the part of the presentation where I need to remember to drink some water, and I also need to remember to breathe. Next time I will open that in advance. Okay, so to further level set, people kind of treat generative AI like it's a completely different type of machine learning and AI, and this is not true. All right, so at the top, we have, the old, boring, not as important, obviously, I'm saying this sarcastically, machine learning, and you take some kind of input, like a picture of a cat, you train a model, and then the model can make a prediction. It gives you a probability whether the picture is of a cat or not of a cat, or if you know what I'm talking about, a hot dog or not a hot dog, right? And then the bottom, people say, oh, now we have LLMs, large language models, generative AI. We have these new types of models that are different. You give them a text, a prompt, and then that is the input, and then they will give you output, either more text, write you a poem about a cat, write you a presentation, or generate an image. And people make these claims that they are vastly different from traditional machine learning and that they're probabilistic and all these things. And that is just quite frankly not true. It can be shown that the bottom type of model, that generative AI, is actually doing the same thing as the traditional machine learning at the top. It's just that instead of predicting whether the image is of a cat or not a cat, or whether the customer will churn or not churn, you are predicting the most likely next word or token, and then just choosing the most likely next word, and then predicting the next one, and predicting the next one, and so forth. Okay, so let's talk about what Gen AI can do. I'm not really sure. These are pretty high-level use cases. These are more like sort of more modalities for Gen AI. We have generative text that most people are familiar with, like i.e. ChatGPT. You put in a prompt, it writes things for you. We also have what I call synthetic media generation, so generating images, video, or even assets like 3D models by using prompts. And then finally, the much less exciting, but I would argue very, very important domain of recognizing audio and turning that into text or vice versa. And we call this automatic speech recognition, or ASR. This field has been around for a very long time, but because of generative AI models, this is now essentially almost a solved problem. And even though it is less sexy, I would argue that it is probably the one where we are seeing the most practical application and business value out of the different types of things that Gen AI can do. Okay, so breaking those down further, for text, obviously helping us write things, whether it be drafting a document or outlining something, or even doing things like creative writing. We have the foundation model providers, obviously OpenAI with ChatGPT, products like Copilot from Microsoft, Claude from Anthropic, and then there's dedicated writing services like Jasper. For synthetic media generation, we see both the companies that provide that, just the models themselves, so companies like Midjourney, DALL-E used to be from OpenAI, but now that's been sort of superseded by the new GPT 4.5. And we see companies like Adobe integrating generative AI directly into their creative suite, so using these technologies as part of creative workflows, and also just providers that specifically provide platforms or tools or apps for doing asset generation, and we have Leonardo AI there. And then in audio, again, the one that I feel is probably the most underrated, doing text-to-speech transcription, or excuse me, text-to-speech rendering, or more importantly, speech-to-text transcription. You can have tools like Otter AI or Fireflies, or now even a Microsoft Teams. You can add your little assistant to a meeting. They can record the meeting, and then also you can sort of chat with the transcript of the meeting or have them summarize it. And now we don't have to have underpaid and overworked interns attend the meeting to take notes, right? So this is amazing what these technologies can now do. There's also AI-generated video, as I was saying. So this image was in the presentation earlier. I made this image. This is a synthetically generated image from a prompt in ClipDrop with Stable Diffusion. So this is an image of a man and a robot sitting in a classroom, and you can put this image into an online video generator, and in about 2 or 3 minutes, I created this video of the man adjusting his glasses and the robot paying more attention. So this is 100% synthetically generated media. As you can see here, this is the original image, and then you can turn that into a video, and this is all coming out of a model that was trained on lots and lots of video. So really amazing what you can do, and I generated this for free in a few minutes. Okay, so more practically speaking, domain-specific use cases. How do we actually use these things to recognize value in the day-to-day work we do? In finance, you can use a lot of the text models for doing things like summarizing documents. And people are talking about what is really an extension of search, right? RAG, retrieval augmented generation. You can do things like talk with a knowledge base and sort of, search and chat with documents in natural language, whether they be financial reports or even structured data. In IT, I'm going to talk about that a fair bit coming up here because it's relevant to a lot of people in this room. Large language models, very, very good at software engineering, very, very good at writing code. But as I will talk about here, they also can do things like help with infrastructure and configuration as well. And also documenting code bases that already exist. And then finally in HR, text models can help with the entire kind of life cycle of hiring. You can draft job postings. You can have the models to help do that. You can have them transcribe and summarize the interviews with candidates. And then you also can even have them look at those two things and then give you an assessment of which candidates are actually best suited for the roles, right? So you can actually integrate text models into kind of every step of the process of hiring in human resources. So now I want to talk about agentic AI, which is still very much in the peak of the hype cycle. Nobody can really agree what agentic AI is, but the general description goes something like this. We're building these systems based on these generative AI models that can operate autonomously, make decisions, and navigate complex workflows in the way that a person would. But as I said, nobody can really agree what the hell an agent is, and there's this funny blog post, white paper there I have linked from TechCrunch, where they talk about how even the large technology providers have differing definitions for what an agent is. But lots of work being done here, a lot of VC dollars being poured into this domain with all the hype. And we are, I think, seeing applications that will eventually stick around. I was just talking to someone the other day who is building agentic systems to replace customer service representatives. And with the permission of the customer, you can have, a 100%, automated conversation with AI on the phone, right? And people, in some cases, cannot believe that it's not a real customer service representative because it's making decisions or answering questions based on the quote-unquote knowledge that it has, all right? So we see a lot of drive behind agentic AI from companies like Salesforce and NVIDIA and Google and Microsoft. And of course, Gartner has another estimate about the number of enterprises that are going to start using agentic AI and the sorts of gains we will see from that. I would take that with a shaker of salt. I probably won't eat my second hat, but we'll see how much of agentic AI is vapor and how much of it will actually realize business value and stick around. So the reason I talk about that is, as I said, in IT, LLMs, generative AI is very, very good at writing code and has really elevated the work of many, many software developers and automated a lot of what they do. So we see these coding copilots, as they're called. The original copilot from GitHub, which most people don't know, actually was around before ChatGPT came out, but is now basically the standard, tightly integrated into all of Microsoft's products, VS Code, and allows you to do even what people are calling now like vibe coding. Doing a lot of scare quotes today. I'm not sure why. Scary presentation. You can do vibe coding where people even that don't have a lot of technical or coding experience can actually build things because these tools enable us, give us the power to do so. So Cursor is another development environment, another AI tool, and they've tightly integrated AI into this development environment, and it's gaining a lot of traction. Replit has been around for quite some time. They have coding and software engineering specific models that they have trained, and then also offer that as a service. And then finally, more on the agentic side, very recently, Anthropic, who make Claude, released this project, which is a research preview called Claude Code. And unlike the other things you see here, it is more of an agentic framework to do, like, sort of replace an entire software developer and work on whole projects of code, as opposed to answering questions about code or writing code sort of file by file. So here, if we're not familiar, you see an example of GitHub. This person is using GitHub Copilot just as a sort of pair programmer, Copilot chat assistant inside of VS Code, and it will answer questions about the code and write more code for you to help you develop what you're building. Copilot can do much, much more than this. You can also use it to make changes in line. You can use it to troubleshoot errors. And a feature I find very helpful now is that if there are code bases on GitHub, you can actually just use GitHub Copilot to chat with the code base and ask it questions about what it does or where different things are. And that's sort of more like a grounded knowledge-based part of GitHub Copilot. So here's Claude Code, again, in research preview. It's a little bit command line based, but you can basically give it a whole project that you were working on in IT and then ask it questions or give it instructions, and it will, quote unquote, think about what it needs to do. And the goal here, what Anthropic is trying to do, is have less just sort of like a pair programmer, less of a, just coder, and more of like a proper agent that does software engineering in its entirety. So you can give it instructions and it will look at the whole code base and then make the changes it needs to make. Okay, and it doesn't stop with just coding. If you're also working with infrastructure on the cloud, as I do at my company, we are primarily an Azure shop. If you're working on AWS, Amazon has trained their Amazon Q model, which is specifically trained to work with AWS and answer questions about the services and code and systems that they use. And then Copilot being everywhere, they also are rolling Copilot out for Microsoft Azure, and this can help you do infrastructure type work. So examples of that to follow right here. We have Copilot still in preview for Azure, but you can see this person is working in the Cloud Shell, and they're just asking some questions about what they need to do from an infrastructure standpoint, and you get responses that either walk you through what you need to do, or also it will also write code from the Azure command line tool and tell you what code you need to run to spin up infrastructure, and then you can actually just run it from inside of Copilot right there. Okay, so Microsoft's still working on this. It's still in preview, but we're now seeing these generative AI tools being integrated even into the work that people that work in IT and infrastructure are doing. Okay, and then this is much more crunchy, but if you're working on a command line, Microsoft has also started to develop what they call this Azure AI shell. So again, this is more kind of agentic. They have AI integrated into this command line application, and you can tell it the types of things you want to do in natural language, and it will come up with a plan of what it needs to do, and then write the commands to actually spin up that infrastructure. And then also, when it's determining what to do, it's kind of like a wizard. You can put in different parameters for what you need, and it will create the code that you need to do the infrastructure. All right, so we're seeing these AI tools not only be built into products and services, but we're seeing it integrated directly into kind of more low-level tools that IT professionals are using to do very hands-on work. Okay, that was a lot. So now we can take a step back and talk more generally about the overall landscape for AI. And then that will lead into what the last part of the presentation, where I talk a little bit about at least my point of view on what the future is going to look like. So as most people are probably familiar with, the main players in the AI space, in the generative AI space, we have OpenAI, obviously the sort of original that came out with ChatGPT and kicked all this generative AI hype cycle off. You know, they're they're the leader in the space, but they're also beleaguered by everything that goes along with that, spending lots and lots of money and fossil fuel to train these models, but then also subject to a lot of scrutiny and criticism for what they are doing as the leader in the space, and Mr. Sam Altman, a controversial figure in some respects. Microsoft, as I've already talked about, obviously pushing Copilot very, very hard into all parts of their service and product offerings, going so far as to rebrand all of O365 as Copilot. So they're really going all in on generative AI. The other interesting thing to note is that even though Copilot is a slightly different model, Microsoft and OpenAI are BFFs and have been for a while. All of OpenAI's models are both trained and run on Microsoft's infrastructure. At least they have been up until very recently. So there's a very, very close relationship between these two. And even though they have different models and services that you can use, they in many ways are not competitors at all. In fact, they're partners. Anthropic up at the top right, responsible for the Claude models. They are a bit of a different company, very much focused on AI safety and what we call alignment, that I will talk about a little bit later. And so they are very, very particular about building a responsible model with the Claude models, and they also do a lot of research in the AI safety, AI understanding, and alignment domain. So the Claude model I find much more popular with people that are in the kind of security, ethics, safety domain, and also quite popular in higher education and amongst academics, PhDs, researchers, people like that. And Meta actually just released the latest series of their open, they're taking a very different approach with their open models, releasing the Llama series of models just openly for all to use. I'm sure there is some kind of market and commercial strategy behind that. Just very recently released the Llama 4 series of models, actually last Saturday, to some initial fanfare, and now mixed results on the performance of the models, and also some concerns that perhaps they have trained these models to a little too closely to the benchmarks by which people are evaluating them. So there's never any shortage of controversy and politics in the Gen AI space and everything that's happening so quickly. But Meta continues to be a leader and continues to push very strongly in this space. You'll hear people talk about the Llama models as kind of the public-facing B2C type stuff. They also do a lot of amazing research internally, developing models for things like computer vision and many, many different use cases that Meta has within their very, very large, sprawling organization. Okay, so those are the big players in the landscape. The challengers, as I call them. XAI, if you're not familiar, the same X as what used to be Twitter, and Mr. Musk, love him or hate him. Obviously a lot of dollars behind this company and positioning themselves as a direct competitor to OpenAI. They have almost exactly the same services and platform offering. They have their competing Grok model, which is notable for being, as far as I'm aware, the only commercially available model with no censorship or guardrails of any kind. It's quite amusing, as I often do, to talk to people in a restaurant or bar and show them on your phone that if you ask Grok to curse at you and put you down, it will happily do so. So interesting and kind of what we would expect given what we know about Mr. Musk. Mistral, very different kind of company, French startup, really a darling of the European AI scene, and a very, very different approach. They're much more open source friendly, much more against censorship and guardrailing their models as well. And even though they're very, very small, they did rise to the top of the iPhone App Store and were the #1 app on there for a short time after they released their Le Chat app for their models. And then Cohere is basically Canada's OpenAI, based in Toronto, close to Richmond Street. I've been to their office. And their CEO, Aidan Gomez, a very important person. He was one of the original authors on the paper that came out with the original transformer model. And Cohere, doing very good work because they are focusing on the business value, and they're also focusing more on enterprise customers. So a very much more focused like B2B type of offering, and I think that's a good thing. And then finally, lots of people have heard about DeepSeek. It's been in the news. Now when I tell people I work in AI, the first they used to say, oh, what do you think about ChatGPT? Now they say, what do you think about DeepSeek? Most people don't know that DeepSeek is actually not a technology company. They are a Chinese asset management firm that happens to do technology, but obviously they have been in the news as a real disruptor, which I'll talk about in a second. But also remember that they are based in the PRC. So if you do things like put information into their model, it does go to servers in China. And also if you ask it questions about certain squares and certain tanks, it will tell you that it doesn't know what you're talking about. So keep those things in mind. Okay, so let's talk about DeepSeek and this new type of model that has come out with what we call reasoning models. And again, more scare quotes here because these things are not thinking. They are just statistical machines that regurgitate language, but that's kind of how our brains work. So OpenAI, again, actually originated the reasoning models with O1, but DeepSeek made a lot more fanfare and was in the news because after OpenAI, they released the R1 model, and they made the claim with absolutely no evidence to back it up that they did the same thing that OpenAI did for tens or even hundreds of millions of dollars in training with a measly $6 million. And OpenAI also never provides any evidence about their financial estimates of what it costs to train these things. So to this I say, in the spirit of my company, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. Also, most people don't know that DeepSeek based a lot of the work they did with the R1 model on OpenAI's work. So they kind of used it as a launch pad or leapfrogged from the work that OpenAI did. So we're not really comparing apples to apples. And as I said, there are concerns around censorship and data privacy and things like that. But basically with these types of models, almost every main provider now has a reasoning or kind of deep thinking mode, and it basically is just kind of teaching the model to say things that would emulate your internal monologue to think through a problem before it gives you an actual response. And they have shown that these types of reasoning models do much better on more complex questions or problems that require a lot of thought, whereas I usually just blurt out the first thing I'm thinking. That was a joke. And then people have taken this one step further, and now we have what is called deep research. And this is really amazing. This is very, very new. And now we're having these agentic AI systems that can actually emulate or do the work that someone like a research analyst or, God forbid, a consultant would normally do. So you can give it instructions to research a particular topic. It will go out onto the web. It will put together a research plan, go out onto the web, search for relevant resources, compile a bunch of knowledge about that topic, and then synthesize a result based on what you've asked it. Okay? So different offerings in this space, but it's quite amazing. You can do things like give a deep research model a simple prompt. It will take some time and generate a research report on a topic ranging from a couple pages to, in some cases, even more than 100 pages in a matter of minutes. All right, so really interesting stuff, and we're really seeing the whole, I would argue, the whole, like all kinds of knowledge work that people typically do like this are changing very rapidly because of what is available. So a picture is worth 1,000 words. I don't know if I said 1,000 yet, but this is kind of the sizzle reel from Perplexity. Oh, that's quite loud. Oh no. So you can see here in Perplexity's sizzle reel, they're asking it to do some deep research, and it's formulating a research plan. And then it's going out, it's actually citing resources as well, but it's going out and searching on the web to put together some research on the topic, which is on the market here. And then once it's done that very rapidly, you can actually export that report even to a PDF. And now you have this nice, very well written and synthesized research report, in some cases, tens of pages or more, written in a matter of minutes. All right, so it is amazing what these technologies can now do. And it's the different providers have taken different approaches to doing this, but OpenAI actually trained a separate model specifically for this task, whereas the other providers like Perplexity and Google have more sort of, bolted together the different existing models they have to make a similar type of solution. Okay, so I also want to talk about risk just a little bit. AI and cybersecurity have been linked together for some time. People have said, oh yeah, you can do all these things with ChatGPT now and GPT, and like there's all this fraud and everything. That has been going on for quite some time. I don't know if you know, but for quite some time, you're almost certainly to read a comment somewhere on Reddit since about 2018 that was not written by a human. But it's a question of scale and the performance. The arms race between the bad guys and the good guys that are trying to thwart this is now sort of in hyperdrive. So as I say, generative AI has been a double-edged sword for security, cybersecurity, privacy, and then the bad guys like scammers who now can write emails and scam emails and things like that that are essentially almost written by a human because many of the generative AI models have basically passed the Turing test. We also see visual language models, or VLMs, now being able to do things like actually solve CAPTCHAs, which are intended to prevent crawlers and automation from accessing things, which means that these models can now actually they actually pass the test that's supposed to be for a human. So obviously, that's a problem. We also see people doing research on the space. There's a well-known model called White Rabbit Neo, which is made by a particular security company. And this is a model that's specifically to be used for cybersecurity researchers and people to investigate the types of things you can do. But the interesting thing about it is that they had to actually take this model and make it completely uncensored, because if you're trying to emulate bad behavior, you need to have a model that isn't well aligned and that will do things that, let's say, your regular Gemini or ChatGPT would not do. Okay, which brings us to the discussion of alignment. So I've talked a little bit about this through the presentation, and I just want to leave people with this. This term alignment also doesn't have a real hard and fast definition, but basically it's saying, do these models behave in a way in general that we expect them to behave, and do they give us the types of answers we want, right? So safety is part of alignment, but alignment describes the overall behavior sort of qualitatively of the models. And this is an area, as I said, that Anthropic is really, really big on, right? But you've probably seen examples of poorly aligned models or systems in the news, things like Air Canada putting a chatbot on their website and then having people ask it to give them a free ticket and tell them it's legally binding, and the model happily doing so, right? So the lesson here is that when you work with, I've done this, and the lesson is when you work with Gen AI products, when you put something out into the world, immediately the first thing people will try to do is break it. The other thing is that sometimes people will use these tools in ways that maybe they were not intended to be used, and the models need to have appropriate guardrails and also be aligned in those cases. So in the education domain, for example, I know particularly that there are lots and lots of different generative AI offerings, but if you have students or teachers or other people using these tools and they start to deviate in the way they're using them into an area that relates to mental health, that relates to politics, that relates to economics or something like that, then there either need to be appropriate safeguards and or there needs to be alignment in the model to make sure that they are compliant with the way we expect them to behave. Okay, so let's talk about the future. We see, based on this discussion, three main emerging trends that I think are going to continue to be important. The reasoning and deep research models, I think this is going to continue, and we're going to see more and more research and better performance and outputs from reasoning. I think also we're going to see more and more types of applications like deep research that are going to automate and elevate the type of knowledge work that so many people in our economy do. Agentic AI and tool use, as they call it, as I said, still very much in the hype cycle. I'm a little bit skeptical of some of it, but I don't think it's going away in the short term, and I think that there are certain use cases where we are going to see very real business value realized, and those will stick around. And then finally, as I talked about, safety and governance will continue to remain important, and if anything, people are talking about these aspects more and more than ever, and that is a very, very good thing. We need to make sure that these systems are not behaving in ways to the users that we don't want them to behave, but also I know people in the space that are doing other types of safety research, and it starts to become political and even philosophical, where people start talking about things like what happens if we build automation to a point where these models get out of control, and there's a lot of other sort of larger risks associated with that. So that is going to continue, and is going to continue to be keep being more and more important every day. And on that note, because AI is so much in the forefront, there are a lot of very large, both political and economic effects and impacts that cannot be denied. So that figure in the top left there is actually the stock price of NVIDIA on the day that the DeepSeek R1 model was released. NVIDIA lost almost $600 billion in value in one day, which was the largest loss of any kind in the history of the stock market. And so just by different companies developing different models and news getting around, there are very, very real impacts to the global economy because of how much is being invested in these technologies and these technology companies. And I don't think it's exactly controversial to say that this is turning into a new, not so cold Cold War between the US of A and China around AI as they continue to develop better and better models and also to compete for talent in this space because it is a highly, highly specialized field and the right people to do that type of work are very few. Also very weird to see the politics, to see Mr. Altman standing there testifying about AI policy next to the quote-unquote leader of the quote-unquote free world. So obviously a lot of political power and say for the people that run these organizations. And then, of course, the loved and hated Mr. Musk, I already mentioned, the world's richest man, having an immense amount of influence, question mark, that he should or should not have on the world stage. Also, the person behind XAI and driving AI forward. So a huge amount of political and economic influence from these organizations just based on how hot AI is, and also the amount of money that is required to develop these technologies and the companies behind them. Which brings me to my next point, which is about the economy and people's concern, their very large concern that the robots are going to take our jobs. And people often harken back and talk about the Luddites. And this is a picture of the Luddites destroying machinery, destroying textile machinery, which is automating away the work that they did as textile manufacturers. And people use the term Luddite as a derogatory term for someone that is anti-technology, for someone that doesn't understand technology, for someone that is anti-progress. But if you actually look deeper into the story behind the Luddites, they weren't actually protesting against progress in technology entirely. That's not what they were doing. What they were protesting against was the automation and commoditization and cheapening of the very skilled, very detailed work that they did to produce very high quality product being replaced with very, very inferior mass commoditized product. And so I hope people can think about this in terms of art, in terms of music, in terms of other types of media that are coming into the legal space and see the obvious analogy with the types of automation we have now, only in the domains of creative and in the domains of intellectual property, in the domain of knowledge work in general. And there are obvious parallels here, okay? But still a lot happening because this is all moving so fast, it's all new, and the law is very, very slow, and technology moves very, very fast. So I have an opinion. I have many opinions. I will share them with you later if you want to have a coffee and argue about things. But I always think about farming. And some people are like, well, what does farming have to do with AI and data? And the answer is a lot, because you don't even have to be talking about AI at all. We're talking about technology, we're talking about automation, we're talking about progress. And so a lot of people used to toil in fields, and a lot of people had jobs farming, and they did very, very hard work, and they worked very, very long hours to make farming happen. And now, because we have technology and automation, we can have a very, very small percentage of the population feed almost all of the population. And the type of work they do is very different, and the type of work they do is actually much, much less grueling and much more efficient than what people have done through all of human history in farming. And so this is the future that I see for AI and knowledge work. Yes, some people who had a job toiling away in the fields are now freed up to do different kinds of work, but we're never going to see software developers go away entirely. They're never going to be replaced. That will not happen. They're never going to be replaced entirely by AI. But these tools and this automation allow us to do the types of work we normally do better and faster, or allow one person to do the work that previously many, many people would have to do. So there are a lot of challenges ahead, and just while I'm showing pictures and being inspirational, There are seas to navigate, and there's a lot of uncertainty still. And I think if anyone tells you that there's not, they are either lying or misguided. But I think what we need to continue to do is to think about what's ahead, think about what is important to us, and also to have people, like myself, to help navigate this journey and think about where we want to steer the ship, okay? Because going all the way back to the beginning of the presentation, in this humble consultant's opinion, the problem right now is that for the vast majority of companies and people, when all you have is a generative AI-shaped hammer, everything looks like it could be a generative AI-shaped nail, and you go around bashing everyone and everything, okay? And that's not actually driving any value. That's not really helping anyone, okay? So I think that this will eventually change, and I think also that we need to be mindful of that. Okay, so in summary, we are seeing some of the original hype from the peak of inflated expectations fade. We are definitely going into the trough of disillusionment, so there are some challenging, tough times ahead for AI as we navigate it, as well as for agentic AI, which is still very much in the peak of inflated expectations. I think we're going to see the plateau of productivity. All these corporations, companies, startups are shoving AI down our throats, putting it into everything. But I think there's going to be a feedback loop where people eventually show these companies where the actual valuable uses are, and we're going to reach that steady state over time. Is it going to take 2 years? Is it going to take 5 years? I don't know. I would probably guess more towards the latter. The last thing I just want to leave you with is, again, there are uncertain times ahead, but as someone much smarter than me I know likes to say, don't try to stay on top of things, try to get to the bottom of things. Think about what really works, think about the signal versus the noise, and don't buy into all the hype and dust being kicked up, okay? Because I'm optimistic, and I think at some point in the future, we're gonna see these things integrated into our everyday lives, and all the work we do, and the net outcome is going to be positive. Okay? If you enjoyed this talk, I am giving a talk a little more low level on AI in education, rethinking the classroom, with my partner, Zaka AI, who work in the AI education space. So if you did enjoy this talk, Alana gave me permission to mention my workshop, which will be happening on Saturday, May 10th, between 2 and 4 p.m., both online as well as in the Fort York Public Library in downtown Toronto. All right, so that is it. I hope you learned something. I hope this was interesting. Thank you very much for your time. If you're interested in chatting more, please reach out and we can talk. Thanks.
Thank you, Myles. You stuck to time like a master. I don't know how you did that. I'm impressed. We have about 5 minutes for questions. Are you okay to take questions? Okay. I have a mic. If you have a question, raise your hand and I will run to you. Right in the back.
I noticed when you were talking about the big players of AI, you didn't mention Google. And many of us are Google for app schools, and we use Google. Google made, AlphaGo, etc. Why was it not included in that area?
If I have to be honest, part of that is my personal bias. Google is definitely a big player in AI with Gemini and just their whole ecosystem that they have. It is my personal bias, and until very recently, and in my opinion still a little bit recently, they got off onto very unsure footing at the beginning of Gen AI, if people remember Bard and things like that before it was Gemini, and even the original what's the word I'm looking for? Anyway, the original versions of Gemini even also were not good. They are getting better. They are now becoming more in the leaders. But that's, if I have to be blunt, just my personal bias. And I still think that their strategy for integrating Gemini into their services outside of for very technical practitioners is a bit muddled, whereas Microsoft it's still muddled, but they're doing a little bit better job with the consumer-facing AI, putting it into Office and things like that.
Hey, thanks for your talk. So I'm curious about vibe coding, and I've experimented just a little bit, and I'm definitely at the very top of the hype cycle with it. So I was wondering if you could bring me down to earth and tell us why it's all going to be terrible, or what's the problem with vibe coding, or what are you predicting for it?
I can give a very short answer, and I can give the slightly longer answer, and I promise I will keep it just as negative as you asked me to. So the short answer is what my dad used to tell me when I was a kid, and that is a little knowledge is a dangerous thing, right? And I think the problem with vibe coding is it's good for prototyping, it's good for toy projects, but as with many other types of products and these models and things, the other problem is it gives you a false sense of security and a false sense of being able to master something, when there are things like people that work in security and engineering can speak much more crankily about this than I can, but certain best practices and things like that, and sustainability and scalability, these are not things that jibe with vibe coding. As an educational tool to help people build MVPs, minimum little projects, and to help people learn, it's amazing, right? But I just don't think that organizations or startups should be vibe coding actual product that gets put out to production. And lots of people are making quips and pointed observations on LinkedIn that the real job market in 5 years is going to be for people to go into some of these companies and mop up all the problems that vibe coding caused. So use with caution, I guess.
Any other questions for Myles? I think we have time for one more. Oh boy.
Myles, if you're thinking about Microsoft and Google as kind of two of the main players in the education space, any thoughts in terms of why Copilot's only for 18 and older and Gemini is for 13 and up?
I will be very honest, I was not aware of this fact. You feel like there should be a very good logical or technical reason for this, but I know that the answer is probably more related to lawyers, and I don't think I'm allowed to say that, so I'll just say CYA. And I would just say that the one company is probably exercising an abundance of caution. Because as far as I know, most of these large companies are so concerned about risk that, as far as I'm aware, both Microsoft and Google's offerings are now, not before, but now, very well, I don't know if I would call them aligned, but the guardrails are definitely there. So I think it's just differing approaches to mitigating risk. That would be my guess.
I don't really know how to ask this question, but it seems like with the alignment problem, one of the things is it seems like there's a fundamental disagreements about what we are aligning to and what our priorities are. And I think like in education is an emerging sort of persistent issue where making things easier is actually exactly the wrong thing for what we want in terms of learning. We want something else. And so just, I don't know if you have any like insights on how to navigate that kind of question or try to figure that out.
Yeah, I have two quick thoughts. We have time, right?
Yep.
Okay, I have two quick thoughts, and then I do have a POV on that. So my quick thoughts are that alignment is a very nebulously defined term, if at all. And maybe other people, I didn't really talk about it today, but maybe other people have heard of like hallucinations. And I have never heard anyone give me a definition for what hallucination is, other than the model said something I don't like, right? It didn't say the thing I wanted it to say. And when people do that, we call it BS. And when models do it, we call it hallucinating, right? So it depends on what you mean by alignment, and you need to be more specific. And then I think in terms of education and in terms of workplaces, on a tactical and executional and technology level, we can take all the steps we need to and put guardrails and safety and solutions in place. But I think in terms of like culturally and how we work with these things, whether it's with students or whether it's with other people in the workplace, we need to just educate people about this and say, look, like, let's use critical thinking. I have a completely different talk, and all it is about like none of the technical bits, but just like how do you use these things responsibly, right? What are reasonable expectations for what these tools can do and how they quote unquote behave? So I think there's two pieces. I think there's it's defining the alignment and what you want out of these things and how you want them to be safe or, quote unquote behave properly. And then the second piece is actually educating your organization and really, as I tried to do in my presentation here, level setting and setting expectations about how these things should behave and what you should expect out of them. So happy to talk about that more as well, if you'd like.
Thank you, Myles, and thank you for your questions. Let's give it up for Myles one more time.
Thank you very much.